The distress signal had been playing on loop for weeks. It wasn't subtle. Desperation rarely was. Across the void of space, through the background radiation of dead stars and the hum of planetary broadcasts, it screamed out, the wail of a broken people. Please, anyone who can hear this, help us. The sovereigns have taken everything. We are a peaceful people. They are destroying us. The cry came in a strange, lilting tone, broadcast across every known frequency, translated automatically by alien software into dozens of languages. It was the kind of message that tugged at the heartstrings, if the galaxy had any left. Most species that heard it had long since learned to ignore such things. It smelled too much like a trap, the kind of thing pirates or hostile powers would deploy to lure in naive saviors. And if it wasn't, then it was worse, the sovereigns themselves. No one wanted to touch the sovereigns. No one wanted to think about them, much less engage. The machines were a plague on existence itself, an empire of self-replicating, hyper-intelligent constructs that moved from system to system, stripping worlds bare and leaving behind nothing but silence. Their logic was perfect and unrelenting. If you were useful, you were assimilated, torn apart and rebuilt into one of them, losing everything that made you, you. If you were not useful, you were simply obliterated. Planets became graveyards. Stars were mined until they flickered out like candles. No one who encountered the sovereigns lived to tell the tale, not for long. So when the cry for help rang out, broadcast from a tiny, insignificant system on the far edge of the galactic map, the galaxy turned its back. Species with vast empires with war fleets that could blot out suns ignored it. Why risk provoking the sovereigns for a dying race? There was no profit in it, no strategy, no survival in answering such a call. The galaxy had learned to mind its own business. But then the message reached Earth. Humanity had always been a little reckless, a little strange. They were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely a few centuries into space travel. Most species viewed them with a mix of amusement and wariness, like one might regard a particularly clever predator that had somehow figured out how to use tools. Earth was a death world, a planet of extremes where life had evolved not through careful balance, but through brutal competition. Its gravity was crushing. Its weather was violent. Its ecosystem was a never-ending arms race of claws, teeth, venom, and cunning. And somehow, out of that madness, humans had emerged. Humans were strange in other ways, too. Where most species sought stability, humans thrived on chaos. Where others avoided conflict, humans seemed to run toward it. They were a species that fought wars for ideas, for pride, for revenge. They fought wars they couldn't win just to prove they could try. And they survived, again and again. When the distress signal reached Earth, it wasn't met with silence. It was met with rage. "Who the hell do these sovereigns think they are?" Commander Ray Vega had barked when the message came across her desk. She'd been standing in the war room of Earth's United Coalition, surrounded by holographic maps and blinking status reports. Her hair was pulled into a tight braid, her uniform crisp, her boots scuffed from years of use. She was a soldier's soldier, one of the best Earth had to offer, and she had no patience for cowards or tyrants. "Machines, ma'am," her second-in-command, Lieutenant Yusuf, had replied dryly. "They don't think? Not the way we do." Well, they're about to learn. The decision to act had been made almost instantly. It wasn't just about saving the alien race, though there was a certain romanticism in the idea of being the galaxy's underdog saviors. It was about sending a message to everyone watching. Humanity did not stand by while bullies tore through the stars. If the galaxy wanted to look the other way, fine. But Earth wouldn't. In record time, humanity mobilized. Every nation on Earth poured resources into the effort. Factories churned out weapons and armor. Scientists worked overtime to retrofit stolen alien technology into humanity's clunky but effective designs. The result was the Titan's Wrath, Earth's newest and most advanced warship. It was a beast of a vessel, bristling with experimental weaponry and shields that pushed the limits of human engineering. And it wasn't alone. A fleet of smaller ships followed in its wake, carrying soldiers, supplies, and enough firepower to make even the sovereigns think twice. The journey to the alien system took weeks. Hyperspace travel was still a relatively new technology for humanity, and it was far from smooth. Ray spent most of the journey on the bridge, staring at the ever-shifting patterns of hyperspace through the observation window. It was a swirling mess of colors and light. Beautiful. It reminded her of the ocean storms she'd grown up watching back on Earth, the way the waves would crash and boil, indifferent to the tiny creatures caught in their grasp. "What do we know about the people who sent the signal?" Ray asked one day, breaking the silence. Yusuf glanced up from his console where he'd been monitoring the ship's systems. Not much. The message didn't include a lot of details. Their language doesn't match anything in our databases. We're calling them the Ilani for now, based on the name of their homeworld, Ilara 7. From what we can tell, they were a peaceful, spacefaring civilization. Small colonies, minimal defenses. They were agriculturalists, mostly. Of course they were, Ray muttered. Never the ones who can fight back. Yusuf hesitated. "You think we're walking into a trap?" Ray turned to him, her dark eyes sharp. "Everything's a trap, Yusuf. You don't survive as long as we have by assuming otherwise. But we're going anyway." "Damn right we are." When the fleet finally dropped out of hyperspace, the sight that greeted them was worse than Ray had imagined. The Ilani system was a graveyard. The planet itself was a burnt husk, its atmosphere choked with ash and debris. Massive craters scarred its surface, some still glowing faintly from recent impacts. Orbital platforms hung in ruins, their shattered pieces drifting in silence. There was no sign of life. "Scanners are picking up sovereign vessels," Yusuf reported, his voice tense. 18 of them, Class 5 dreadnoughts. They're moving into formation." "Of course they are," Ray said, her jaw tightening. "They knew we were coming. They always do." The sovereigns had likely detected the distress signal just as quickly as humanity had. Maybe they'd even left it running on purpose, hoping to draw in another foolish species to crush. But that was fine. Humanity wasn't here for an easy fight. "Bring us into range," Ray ordered. "Charge all weapons. I want them to know exactly who they're dealing with." The sovereign ships were sleek and angular, their surfaces glowing with an eerie green light. They moved with perfect precision, like predators circling prey. But as they closed in, the Titan's wrath unleashed its first volley. Massive kinetic projectiles, plasma lances, and disruptor beams tore through the void, slamming into the lead sovereign ship. The explosion lit up the darkness, a brief, brilliant flare of light. The battle had begun. Ray stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the railing as the ship shuddered beneath her. The sovereigns were fast and deadly, but humanity's fleet fought with a kind of reckless ferocity that was impossible to predict. Where the sovereigns relied on cold logic, humanity relied on instinct, creativity, and sheer stubbornness. "Send the Hellfire teams," Ray said. From the hangars of the Titan's wrath, dozens of drop pods launched toward the planet below. Each pod carried a squad of human marines, their exosuits gleaming in the faint light of the burning atmosphere. These soldiers were humanity's finest, trained to fight and survive in the harshest conditions imaginable. And they were ready. On the planet's surface, the sovereigns were everywhere. Their drones swarmed in perfect formation, their sleek metallic bodies reflecting the orange glow of fires consuming the Ilani cities. But when the human marines hit the ground, they hit hard. Explosions tore through the ranks of sovereign machines as the soldiers fought with a mix of brute force and cunning. Every shot, every swing of their weapons was driven by the knowledge that there was no retreat. This was humanity's stand. Back on the bridge, Ray watched the battle unfold on the holodisplay. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her voice steady as she barked orders. Every instinct told her that this was a suicide mission, that the sovereigns were too powerful, too advanced, but she refused to give in to fear. Humanity had faced impossible odds before, and they'd won. "Commander," Yusuf said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've got something on comms. It's not the sovereigns. It's the survivors." A crackling, weak signal filled the bridge. "You came," a voice whispered. It was soft and trembling, full of disbelief. "You actually came." Ray closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of those words settling on her shoulders. When she opened them, her expression was hard, determined. "Yes," she said, "we came." And as the Titan's wrath fired its next volley, tearing through another sovereign ship, Ray Vega made a silent promise to the Ilani. "You're not alone anymore. This is our fight now." The fleet surged forward into the chaos, the engines of humanity's warships roaring like defiant thunder against the vast silence of space. On the bridge of the Titan's wrath, Commander Ray Vega stood tall, a figure of unyielding resolve as the sovereign fleet moved to intercept. The hollow display flickered with tactical overlays. Red for the enemy's ships, blue for humanity's fleet, and yellow for the scattered fragments of wreckage that littered the system like a cemetery. "We've confirmed 18 sovereign vessels, Commander," Lieutenant Yusuf said, his hands gliding over the console as data poured in. "They're forming a pincer. Looks like they're going to try to trap us between their heavies and those smaller flanking vessels." "Bold of them," Ray said, her voice cool. "They think we scare easy." The sovereigns, for all their cold efficiency, had no sense of what humanity was. Most species in the galaxy avoided direct conflict with the machines, retreating to the safety of deep space or fortified homeworlds. The sovereigns expected the same. An enemy that would scatter and run, trying in vain to outlast an inevitable. But humans didn't run, humans fought. "Charge up the main railguns," Ray ordered. "Target their lead ship. I want to crack their line before they can finish the maneuver." The ship hummed with energy as its primary weapons powered up, drawing from the massive reactors buried deep within the Titan's wrath. The railguns were crude by galactic standards, massive cannons that hurled solid tungsten slugs at incredible speeds. But they hit harder than anything else humanity had ever built, and right now brute force was exactly what they needed. "Railguns ready," the weapons officer said, his voice taut with focus. "Target locked. Fire." The ship shuddered as the railguns discharged, the recoil reverberating through the hull like the pounding of a war drum. On the hollow display, 2 bright streaks of light shot forward, crossing the void with terrifying speed. The lead sovereign vessel had no time to react. The first slug punched through its shields, shattering them like glass. The second hit its core, and the entire ship erupted in a violent explosion of green light and debris. Cheers erupted on the bridge, but Ray silenced them with a sharp gesture. "Focus! We've got 17 more to deal with." The sovereign fleet adjusted instantly, their formation shifting to compensate for the loss of their lead ship. Their angular hulls gleamed with eerie green light as they accelerated, their weapon systems coming online. They were faster, more agile, and far more advanced than humanity's ships, and they knew it. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that humans had never played by the rules. "Launch decoys," Ray ordered. "Let's give them something to chase." Small, spherical drones ejected from the Titan's wrath, each one emitting a complex array of signals designed to mimic the heat signatures and energy profiles of human ships. The sovereigns immediately broke formation, some of their ships peeling off to pursue the decoys. It was a minor victory, but it bought the fleet precious seconds to regroup. "Commander," Yusuf said, his voice grim, "we're picking up new readings from the planet's surface. Looks like ground forces are engaging our marines." Ray's jaw tightened. She could picture it in her mind's eye, the scorched ruins of Ilara 7, the once vibrant cities now reduced to smoldering craters. The sovereigns wouldn't just leave drones behind. They'd send in their walkers, their harvesters, their biomechanical monstrosities. And humanity's soldiers, brave, reckless, stubborn, were down there in the thick of it. "Patch me through to Hellfire Team 1, Ray said. The holo display shifted, and the face of Captain Leon Novak appeared. His helmet visor was up, revealing a face smeared with ash and dirt. Behind him, the faint sounds of battle echoed. Explosions, gunfire, the metallic shriek of sovereign drones. He looked haggard but determined. "Captain Novak, report," Ray said. "We've made landfall, ma'am," Novak said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Enemy resistance is heavier than we anticipated. Drones everywhere. Looks like the Sovereigns are using the ruins as cover. Lots of snipers, ambushes. But we're holding the line. Casualties. 17 confirmed KIA, another dozen wounded. We've set up a triage point near what used to be one of the Alani city centers. Still no sign of survivors, but..." He hesitated. "But what?" Novak's expression darkened. "We're finding bodies, Commander. Civilians, hundreds of them. Looks like they were rounded up and harvested." Ray's stomach turned. She'd heard the stories about what the Sovereigns did to their victims, but hearing it and seeing it were two different things. The machines didn't just kill, they repurposed. They stripped sentient beings down to their raw components, turning flesh and bone into fuel, into machinery, into tools. It was a fate worse than death. "Understood," Ray said, her voice cold. "Stay on mission, Captain. Secure the area and keep searching. If there are any Alani left, we're going to find them." "Yes, ma'am." The feed cut off, and Ray turned her attention back to the battle unfolding in space. The Titan's wrath was holding its own, but the rest of the fleet was struggling. The smaller human ships were fast but fragile, and several had already been destroyed, their wreckage tumbling through the void. The Sovereigns were relentless, their weapons precise and devastating. "Commander, the Ajax is taking heavy fire," Yusuf said. "They've lost shields and propulsion. Looks like they're drifting." Ray glanced at the holodisplay. The Ajax was one of their frigates, a nimble little ship with a crew of 50. It was dead in the water now, its hull scorched and venting atmosphere. Sovereign vessels were closing in, their weapons charging for a kill shot. "Get me Captain Mills," Ray said. The face of Captain Samara Mills appeared on the display, her expression grim but focused. Behind her, sparks flew from a damaged console, and crew members scrambled to contain the damage. "Commander Vega," Mills said, her voice strained. "We're not going to last much longer." "Hold on, Captain. We're coming for you." Ray turned to her weapons officer. "Target the Sovereigns closing in on the Ajax. Full spread." The Titan's wrath unleashed a barrage of missiles and plasma bolts, cutting through the enemy ships with brutal efficiency. 2 of the Sovereigns went down in flames, and the 3rd retreated. But it wasn't enough. The Ajax was too badly damaged to continue. "Yusuf, send a recovery team," Ray said. "Get those people off that ship." "Yes, ma'am." The Sovereigns pressed the attack, their ships moving with cold precision. The Titan's wrath shuddered as enemy fire slammed into its shields, and warning lights flashed across the bridge. "Radio shields at 60%, Yusuf reported. "If we don't take out their heavies soon, we're going to be in trouble." Ray gritted her teeth. The Sovereigns weren't just stronger, they were smarter, their tactics adapting to counter humanity's every move. It was like fighting a predator that learned with every strike. But humanity still had one advantage: unpredictability. "Bring us in close," Ray said. "I want us right in their faces." Yusuf blinked. "Commander, that's it." The Titan's wrath surged forward, its engines roaring as it closed the distance to the Sovereign fleet. It was a risky move. One misstep and they'd be torn apart, but it was the kind of gamble humans thrived on. As the Titan's wrath entered the heart of the enemy formation, it unleashed a storm of firepower, its weapons tearing through the Sovereigns at point-blank range. The bridge was chaos, alarms blaring and consoles sparking as the ship took hit after hit. Ray stood firm, barking orders and making split-second decisions as the battle raged on. The Sovereigns fought back with ruthless efficiency, but they couldn't match humanity's sheer audacity. One by one, their ships fell, until only a handful remained. "Commander, the Sovereigns are retreating," Yusuf said, disbelief in his voice. "We're driving them off." "Not yet, we're not," Ray said. "Target their flagship. Let's finish this." The Titan's wrath turned its weapons on the remaining Sovereign vessel, a massive, angular ship that loomed over the battlefield like a dark omen. Its shields were still up, but they flickered under the relentless assault of humanity's fleet. Ray watched as the ship began to falter, its engines sputtering and its weapons falling silent. "Fire everything we've got," Ray ordered. "I want that thing gone." The final barrage was deafening, a storm of light and fire that consumed the Sovereign flagship. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but debris. Silence fell over the bridge. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. Half the fleet was gone, and the survivors were battered and bloodied, but they had won. Against all odds, humanity had stood its ground and delivered a message to the Sovereigns and the galaxy. Ray took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. "Status report," she said. Yusuf scanned his console. "We've got survivors on the Ajax, and the recovery teams are bringing them aboard now. Casualty reports are still coming in, but—" "It's bad, Commander." Ray nodded grimly. She knew the price of war. But as she looked at the holodisplay, at the ruined planet below and the scattered remains of the Sovereign fleet, she felt a flicker of hope. They had answered the cry for help. They had made a stand. And they weren't done yet. "This course for the surface," Ray said. "We're going to finish what we started." The fleet descended toward Ilaura 7, the battered ships cutting through the smoke and ash like avenging angels. And as the Titan's wrath entered the atmosphere, Ray Vega made a silent promise to the Ilani, to her crew, and to herself. This is just the beginning. The surface of Ilaura 7 stretched out like a scarred battlefield as the fleet descended. The ruined cities glinted under the fiery haze of the choked atmosphere, the mosaic of shattered structures and dark, lifeless craters. Smoke rose in tendrils from the charred remains of what once might have been thriving communities. The air, thick with ash and laced with acrid traces of chemical fires, created a foreboding shroud over the battered planet. This wasn't just a war zone, it was the aftermath of a massacre. Commander Ray Vega watched the landscape scroll by on the Titan's Wrath's holodisplays. It wasn't her first time setting foot on a ruined world, but this was different. The Sovereigns hadn't simply destroyed this place, they had erased it. From orbit it had been hard to fathom the scale of the destruction, but now, with the burning remnants so close she could almost feel the heat, the horror hit her square in the chest. "Commander," Lieutenant Yusuf's voice broke the silence. "Ground forces have secured a perimeter around the northern district of what used to be the Ilani capital. There's some structural cover there. They've also established a temporary safe zone for evac and triage. We're bringing them reinforcements now." "How are they holding?" Ray asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Barely," Yusuf replied grimly. "They're fighting tooth and nail to hold back the Sovereign ground units. Drones, walkers, some kind of biomechanical monstrosities. They're buying time for us to push in, but they're getting torn apart." Ray nodded, her jaw tightening. We're not leaving them down there to bleed out. Get us boots on the ground, now." As the Titan's Wrath approached the lower atmosphere, the ship's hangars roared with life. Squads of human soldiers stood ready, armored in their exosuits and armed to the teeth. The suits were designed for adaptability in hostile environments, their systems calibrated to withstand Ilaura 7's ruined landscape. They were battle-scarred already. Marines from the Hellfire teams who had faced the Sovereigns firsthand and lived to tell the tale. Captain Leon Novak was one of them, though alive was becoming a relative term. He stood at the head of his squad, his face streaked with dirt and blood, the weight of exhaustion visible even through his grim determination. Around him, his team loaded weapons, checked gear, and prepared for the drop. "Listen up," Novak barked, his voice cutting through the din of the hangar. "The Sovereigns are still dug in across the city ruins, but we've got reinforcements incoming and we're going to break their hold. This isn't a defensive op anymore. We're taking the fight to them." "Damn right we are," one of the Marines muttered, eliciting a few grim chuckles from the squad. Novak's helmet sealed with a hiss, his visor snapping shut. "Drop in 3. Stay tight, stay sharp, and for the love of all that's holy, don't let those bastards touch you. Move out." The drop pods launched from the Titan's Wrath like a swarm of fiery comets, streaking down through the atmosphere toward the ruined capital. Inside each pod, the Marines braced themselves against the jarring descent, their weapons clutched tightly. The ride was rough, turbulence shaking them like dice in a cup, but no one complained. They'd been through worse. When the pods hit the ground, they hit hard. Explosive bolts blew the hatches open and the Marines poured out into the chaos. The air was thick with smoke, the ground littered with debris and bodies. Some human, some Ilani, and some unrecognizable hybrids of flesh and metal. The Sovereigns were everywhere, their drones skittering across the ruins like insects, their walkers looming like mechanical giants. Novak's squad immediately moved into formation, their weapons blazing as they engaged the nearest enemy units. Pulse rifles spat streams of superheated plasma, shredding through Sovereign drones with brutal efficiency. Grenades arced through the air, detonating in brilliant flashes that sent shrapnel tearing through the enemy ranks. But for every machine they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "Hold the line," Novak shouted, his voice amplified by his suit's comm system. "We've got reinforcements incoming." Above them, the Titan's wrath unleashed a devastating barrage of firepower. Kinetic projectiles and plasma bolts rained down from the ship's cannons, carving paths of destruction through the enemy forces. The Sovereign's walkers, massive and heavily armored, crumpled under the relentless assault, their mechanical limbs snapping like twigs. It was a temporary reprieve, but it gave the Marines the breathing room they needed to push forward. As the battle raged on, Ray and a small contingent of commandos descended in a tactical shuttle, landing near the front lines. The shuttle's ramp slammed down and Ray stepped out, her armored boots crunching against the rubble-strewn ground. Her exosuit was sleeker and more advanced than those of the regular Marines, its dark plating etched with the insignia of Earth's United Coalition. A plasma rifle hung across her back, and a combat blade was sheathed at her side. The moment she stepped onto the battlefield, the weight of command settled on her like a physical presence. Her comms buzzed with reports, positions, casualties, enemy movements. But she pushed it all to the back of her mind. Right now, the only thing that mattered was survival. "Novak," she called out, striding toward the captain as he crouched behind a makeshift barricade of rubble. "What's the situation?" "Not great, ma'am," Novak replied, ducking as a Sovereign drone fired a burst of plasma overhead. "We've pushed them back a little, but they're dug in deeper than a tick on a dog. We need heavy support if we're going to clear them out." "Support's on the way," Ray said. "In the meantime, we're going to punch a hole through their line and give our people some breathing room. Are your men ready?" Novak grinned, though it was more grim determination than humor. "We're always ready."